Imagine standing at the edge of a river in northern Italy, watching the most dangerous man in the Roman world make a decision that would change history forever. It is the year 49 BC. The night is cold, the water is black. And on the other side of that river lies everything: power, civil war, and the end of a republic that had stood for nearly 5 centuries. He looks at his soldiers, he looks at the water, and then, without hesitation, he crosses. If you've ever wondered how one man can bend an entire civilization to his will, how ambition, brilliance, and ruthlessness can remake the world, then stay with us. Because the story of Julius Caesar is not just the story of a man, it is the story of Rome itself, at the moment it stopped being a republic and began becoming an empire. Gaius Julius Caesar was born in 100 BC into a patrician family that had seen better days. The Julii claimed descent from the goddess Venus herself. But by Caesar's childhood, the family's political influence had faded, and their finances had grown thin. Rome in the late Republic was a city of violent contrasts: marble temples rising above streets thick with poverty, senators draped in purple, while soldiers returned from foreign wars with nothing. It was a city where power was everything, and Caesar, even as a young man, understood that with a clarity most people never achieve in a lifetime. His early years were defined not by triumph but by survival. When the dictator Sulla marched on Rome and began purging his enemies, Caesar, connected by marriage to Sulla's great rival Marius, found himself on a list of the condemned. He was barely a teenager. He fled, he hid, he negotiated for his life through intermediaries, and eventually Sulla relented, reportedly warning those who interceded that Caesar was dangerous, that in this boy there were many Mariuses. Sulla, for all his brutality, saw it clearly. He simply chose not to act on what he saw. Caesar spent his 20s building reputation the only way a Roman nobleman could, through military service, legal advocacy, and the cultivation of the right relationships. He studied rhetoric in Rhodes, survived capture by pirates on the Aegean Sea, a story that reveals everything about his character. When pirates seized his ship and demanded a ransom of 20 talents, Caesar laughed and told them they were undervaluing him. He insisted they demand 50. He spent his weeks in captivity writing poetry, exercising, sleeping soundly, and telling his captors in a tone somewhere between jest and prophecy that once he was free, he would return and crucify every one of them. They thought he was joking. He was not. The moment his ransom was paid, he raised a fleet, hunted them down, and crucified them all. Though in a gesture of mercy he considered quite generous, he slit their throats first. This is who Caesar was: charming, brilliant, generous, and absolutely implacable. He returned to Rome and entered politics with the same controlled aggression he brought to everything else. He spent money he didn't have, hosting lavish games and festivals, cultivating the love of the Roman mob with the precision of a general positioning troops. He understood something his rivals never quite grasped: that in a republic, even an increasingly broken one, public adoration was a form of military power. The people who cheered for you in the forum were the same people who would fight for you when the moment came. The moment came sooner than anyone expected. In 60 BC, Caesar forged a secret political alliance with 2 of the most powerful men in Rome: the fabulously wealthy Marcus Licinius Crassus and the celebrated general Pompey the Great. This arrangement, which historians would later call the First Triumvirate, was not a formal institution, but a private agreement among 3 men who together controlled more money, military loyalty, and political influence than the rest of the Senate combined. Caesar needed their support. They needed his political genius. For a time, it worked perfectly. As consul in 59 BC, Caesar rammed through legislation with a force that left his opponents breathless. Land reform for Pompey's veterans, commercial advantages for Crassus's allies, and for himself, command of the armies in Gaul. It was this last piece that would define the next decade of history. Gaul was not a posting, it was a canvas. And Caesar painted across it in blood and fire for 8 years, conducting one of the most brilliant and brutal military campaigns the ancient world had ever seen. He fought Germanic tribes, crossed the Rhine, landed twice in Britain, and crushed revolts with a ruthlessness that was, even by Roman standards, striking. When the Gallic leader Vercingetorix united the tribes of Gaul in a last desperate uprising in 52 BC, Caesar responded with a siege of extraordinary complexity at Alesia, surrounding the hilltop fortress with miles of earthworks, then building a second ring of fortifications facing outward to hold off the Gallic relief army. Trapped between Roman walls and a Roman army, Vercingetorix finally descended from the fortress, laid down his weapons at Caesar's feet, and surrendered. It was one of the most dramatic moments in military history, and it cemented Caesar's status not just as a successful general, but as a figure of near mythological capability. The Gallic Wars made Caesar the most dangerous man in Rome. They also made him rich, gave him battle-hardened legions that were personally loyal to him, and kept him just far enough from the city that his enemies could scheme against him. And scheme they did. The Senate, led by conservatives who feared what Caesar was becoming, began pushing for him to be stripped of his command and prosecuted for alleged illegalities during his consulship. This was not justice. This was political execution by legal means. If Caesar returned to Rome as a private citizen, he would be destroyed. There was one way out. Cross the Rubicon, the small river in northern Italy that marked the boundary between the Roman provinces and Italy proper. Roman law forbade any general from crossing it with his army. To do so was to declare war on Rome itself. Caesar crossed it. The phrase has echoed through 20 centuries of human language precisely because of what it meant in that moment. There was no negotiation to return to, no compromise to be struck. This was the point of no commitment becoming total commitment, of possibility becoming destiny. His general Mark Antony was with him. So were his veterans. Men who had fought for a decade across the cold mud of Gaul, and who would follow this man into the underworld itself. When Pompey and the Senate learned Caesar had crossed, they fled Rome in panic. The city that had defied Hannibal, that had beaten back Carthage and Macedonia and countless enemies, simply emptied out. Senators running for the ships, Pompey racing south, the Republic crumbling in real time. What followed was civil war across the entire Mediterranean world. Caesar moved with a speed that seemed to defy the physics of ancient travel. He consolidated Italy, outmaneuvered Pompey's forces in Spain, crossed the Adriatic, and finally met Pompey at the Battle of Pharsalus in 48 BC in Greece. Though heavily outnumbered, Caesar's veterans broke Pompey's cavalry and folded his army in a collapse so rapid it was almost surreal. Pompey fled to Egypt, where he was murdered on the beach by agents of the young pharaoh Ptolemy XIII, who thought the assassination would please Caesar. It did not. Caesar wept. Pompey had once been his ally, had once been Rome's greatest general, had once been his son-in-law. Whatever lay between them, he deserved to die by Roman hands, not these. In Egypt, Caesar met Cleopatra, and in her found something he recognized. a ruler of matching ambition and intelligence, trapped in a political crisis not entirely unlike his own. He stayed in Egypt longer than he should have, fought a war there, helped her secure the throne, and then moved on, because Caesar was never truly still. He mopped up resistance in Asia Minor so quickly that his dispatch to Rome contained only 3 words that have survived 2 millennia: Veni, Vidi, Vici. I came, I saw, I conquered. Back in Rome, Caesar was appointed dictator, not for the traditional 6-month emergency term, but eventually for life. He reformed the calendar, reorganized the provinces, began vast building projects, launched plans for new roads and canals, and extended Roman citizenship to new populations across the empire. He was simultaneously brilliant, magnanimous toward his defeated enemies, and utterly blind to one critical truth: that a Rome which had defined itself for 5 centuries as a republic could not simply transform into a monarchy without tearing itself apart, regardless of how capable the monarch was. The senators who drove their daggers into him on the Ides of March, 44 BC, believed they were saving the republic. In reality, they were dooming it. Caesar's death did not restore the old order. It shattered whatever remained of it. The civil wars that followed were longer and bloodier than the ones before. His heir, Octavian, later Augustus, would eventually become Rome's first emperor, bringing the republic to its final, formal end. Everything Caesar's assassins feared, everything they killed him to prevent, came to pass anyway. Only Caesar was not there to see it. Here is what history teaches us, looking back across 2,000 years at the life of Julius Caesar. Power does not always corrupt. Sometimes it simply reveals. Caesar was ambitious before anyone gave him an army. He was ruthless before he had any real enemies to destroy. He was a visionary before he had a republic to reshape. The Rome that made him was already fracturing, already too large and too complex for the institutions designed to govern a city-state. Caesar did not break the republic. The republic was already broken. He was simply the man who moved through the wreckage with enough will and brilliance to build something new from the ruins, and who paid for that act of creation with his life. The Rubicon, the Forum, the daggers, these are not just historical events. They are the permanent vocabulary of what it looks like when one person's ambition meets a civilization at the hinge of its own transformation. Caesar understood, perhaps better than anyone who has ever lived, that history does not wait for permission. It moves. And those who hesitate at the river's edge are remembered, if they are remembered at all, as footnotes to the ones who crossed.